In the annals of history, few conflicts have been as controversial and divisive as the Vietnam War. Spanning 2 decades from 1955 to 1975, this war was a clash of ideologies, a struggle between communism and anti-communism that reverberated across the globe. The main parties were North Vietnam, bolstered by its communist allies, and South Vietnam, backed by the United States and other anti-communist nations. The Vietnam War was a complex and convoluted conflict that went beyond mere politics and military strategies. It was a war that penetrated into the fabric of societies, cultures, and individuals. It was a war that challenged the conscience of nations and questioned the essence of humanity. The Vietnam War was not just a war, it was a defining moment that shaped the world. The roots of the Vietnam War can be traced back to the colonial era. Like many conflicts of its time, the Vietnam War has a tangled history deeply rooted in the struggle for power and independence. The French colonization of Vietnam, which began in the mid-19th century, set the stage for a clash of cultures and ideologies. As the French exploited Vietnam for its resources, a wave of nationalism swept across the country, fueled by the desire for self-determination. This nationalism found a leader in Ho Chi Minh, a charismatic figure who dedicated his life to the cause of Vietnamese independence. However, the path to independence was far from smooth. The Geneva Accords, signed in 1954, divided Vietnam into 2 separate entities, North and South, a division that sowed the seeds of future conflict. Thus, the stage was set for a conflict that would last for 2 decades. A conflict that would shape the course of history and leave a lasting impact on the world. The United States, driven by its policy of containment, soon found itself deeply involved in the conflict. The year was 1964 when the Gulf of Tonkin incident occurred, marking a significant escalation in America's participation in the Vietnam War. This incident, a reported attack on American warships by North Vietnamese vessels, served as the catalyst for the U.S. to intensify its military involvement. And so, key personalities stepped onto the stage. President Kennedy, who initially sent military advisors to Vietnam, set the groundwork. Then President Johnson, following the Tonkin incident, authorized the deployment of combat troops. Finally, President Nixon, despite his promise to the American public of a swift withdrawal, expanded the conflict into neighboring countries. These actions intertwined the fate of the United States with the outcome of the war in Vietnam. The United States was now neck-deep in a war thousands of miles away from its shores. The war was a brutal and bloody affair, with both sides resorting to unprecedented tactics. As the conflict reached its climax, the Vietnam landscape bore witness to some of the most intense and savage battles of the 20th century. The Battle of Khe Sanh, for example, stands out as a testament to the ferocity of the conflict. For 77 grueling days, U.S. forces were subjected to a relentless siege by the North Vietnamese army. Despite the odds, the defenders held their ground, but the cost was high, with casualties numbering in the thousands. The war also saw the widespread use of chemical weapons, most notably Agent Orange. This toxic defoliant was sprayed over vast tracts of Vietnamese countryside with the aim of denying the enemy cover. But the human cost was devastating. The chemicals caused widespread health problems amongst the Vietnamese population and U.S. veterans alike, leaving a legacy of suffering that continues to this day. The civilian population, caught in the crossfire, suffered immensely. Villages were razed, families were torn apart, and countless lives were lost. The war had become a daily nightmare for the ordinary people of Vietnam, their lives forever marked by the horrors they had witnessed. In the midst of this turmoil, the Tet Offensive took place. This massive assault by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces caught the U.S. and South Vietnamese off guard. While ultimately a military failure for the North, the Tet Offensive had a profound impact on public opinion in the United States. The ferocity of the attack and the heavy U.S. losses shocked the American public, shaking their faith in the government's ability to win the war. The war was taking a heavy toll, and public sentiment was turning against the conflict. As the body count rose, so too did the voices of dissent. The Vietnam War had reached its zenith, and the tide of public opinion was starting to turn. The conflict was far from over, but the seeds of change had been sown. The end of the Vietnam War was as complex and controversial as its beginning. This was a conflict that didn't simply stop with a clear victor standing tall, but rather, it faded into a series of poignant and haunting echoes that continue to reverberate today. Let's delve into the Paris Peace Accords. Signed in January of 1973, these accords promised a ceasefire and a withdrawal of the remaining American troops. Yet a true peace remained elusive. Even as the last American soldier departed from Vietnam's soil, internal struggles persisted, showcasing the delicate and volatile nature of the peace that had been brokered. Then came the fall of Saigon in April of 1975. The image of helicopters lifting off from the U.S. Embassy's rooftop, leaving behind a country torn by war, is an indelible symbol of the end of the American involvement. Saigon's fall marked the beginning of Vietnam's unification under communist rule, a stark shift in the country's political landscape. The aftermath of the war was, tragically, yet another battle. A humanitarian crisis ensued as the Vietnamese people faced severe economic hardship and political repression. The boat people, as they were often referred to, were thousands of refugees who risked their lives fleeing the country on rickety boats in search of better prospects. Many perished on the treacherous sea voyages, while others found new homes in different corners of the world. The impact on Vietnam was profound and far-reaching. The war left the country in ruins, its people scarred, and its economy crippled. The struggle for reconstruction and reconciliation was a long and arduous journey, one that still continues in various forms today. In the end, the Vietnam War was more than a conflict between nations. It was a testament to the human spirit of resilience and survival, of pain and healing. The Vietnam War ended, but its scars remain, a poignant reminder of a turbulent time in our history. The Vietnam War was a defining moment in the 20th century, a conflict that shaped nations and changed the world. We've journeyed together from the origins and causes of this divisive war, to the United States' entry into the fray, through the war's zenith and ultimately its end and aftermath. Each phase of the war was marked by pivotal decisions, triumphs and tragedies that have left indelible marks on history. The stories of soldiers and civilians alike have painted a poignant picture of the human aspect of the war, underscoring the emotional toll of the conflict. In reflecting on the Vietnam War, we are encouraged to contemplate the lessons learned and their relevance in our world today. The themes of war, peace, and diplomacy are as pertinent now as they were then. As we look back, we are reminded of the cost of war, the value of peace, and the importance of understanding our past to shape a better future.